you all very much. Thank you our panelists for rich papers which track a series of alternative paradigms, not just for the future and for transition, but I think for thinking about Polish-Ukrainian studies. We've ranged from soft power to hard power, if you like, through civil society and to political philosophy. So I'm sure there are lots and lots of questions. And I will take this opportunity to open the floor, therefore. Okay, should we take... Well, how are you doing this? You're taking a group. Yeah, that's what I thought you would do. So we'll take about 4 questions, and then we'll... Sequentially, you can answer them. Thank you.
Can I just make a question? I have a question, but I'd like to make a comment first. To Mr. Sierakowski, the Ukrainians didn't want to expel the Poles. They murdered them brutally. Okay, so remember that. And they burnt the villages, the houses, etc., etc. Okay. Yes, I agree. But they killed, they murdered brutally, and expelled what was left, perhaps. People ran away, actually. As we saw in the 2 films, people ran away, fear of their lives. Mr. Bonney's presentation, it's easy to say noble words, but ask him how many of those noble words he actually implemented as a minister in Poland, and you'll find that he didn't. He wasn't able to. I would like to ask for the Ukrainian side to say something about the courage of people who have the ability and the willpower to challenge the status quo, because if you don't challenge the status quo, you'll always be a prisoner. And I really want to know more about what people are doing rather than what institutions are doing.
Thank you. And then you.
Well, I have no comments, but just 2 questions. One of them is rather provocative to Slavomir because he's my good friend of mine. Don't you think that to give up Kresy, as the situation was actually not so difficult because they were taken over by the Soviets. So, they did not belong. I can imagine the same situation today in Ukraine when we are given easily Crimea, but not to Russians, but to Crimean Tatars. Actually, the same was with Kresy. Lviv and Vilnius were given not to Russians, but to Ukrainians and Lithuanians. That's my provocative question. And more theoretical one, which is both to Slavomir and probably to Tadeusz as well. Don't you think that all these arguments of realpolitik cannot be actually discussed and debated and disproved from moral point of view, because they lack any morality, they lack any moral position, they are based on some Darwinist theory, Darwinist presumption that big animals dominate over small animals, and that's all. So how can we discuss? How can we discuss with people like Cohen or all these realpolitik scholars, Marheimer and etc.? I don't know.
Łukasz Adamski. I didn't want to intervene in this session, but this last remark of Sławomir provoked me also to comment it, namely question of genocide. Of course, this is a legal definition, and the Convention on Genocide was adopted, as all we know, after the war. So, per definition, it does not apply to the events, crimes committed before at least the date of entering into force. So if we use the term genocide in the legal meaning, or if we discuss on the legal platform, then we shouldn't use this term with regard to Volhynia massacre. But if we use this term as a form of, let's say, stigmatization of crimes, of special atrocities, brutality, then of course I would say I couldn't imagine, let's say, more classical example of genocide, according to Lemkin, than Volhynia massacre. It is not any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part national, ethnic, racial, or religious groups as such, killing members of the groups, causing serious bodily and mental harm to members of the groups, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and so on and so forth. I could continue. So let's say, my conclusion is we should firstly distinguish between the legal meaning of genocide and using genocide in political debates as a form of stigmatization, and secondly, we should remember that it's not only to destroy the whole nation, the whole ethnic group, but also a part. And actually, I think lawyers will not especially examine what was the intention, but they will examine what the facts were. Thank you.
These questions are known as such as a theoretical question.
I'm not going to answer to you because I think the half of my lecture was why Poles shouldn't press Ukrainians. At least you say that you're Ukrainian, then I'm gonna agree with you. If not, then I just disagree with you, and I said why before. As for Mykola's question, of course you're right. Like, you know, the Kresy are lost, and but to forget about Kresy is much harder. And we are dealing here with collective remembrance, and we know that it's actually maybe it's imagined community and other kind. But it's so hard to deal and to change imagined communities like nation. Look what's happening in European Union. You know, we can have a constructivist definition of nation, but it's so hard to change anything in it. I mean, and it's the same with collective remembrance. Maybe collective remembrance is even stronger than a border. Okay, maybe it's even harder to change collective remembrance than, or attitude to one nation than to change a border. So this would be my answer. As for the people like Cohen and this kind of false realpolitik, actually Darwin is a moral argument, the Darwinistic argument. It's not a pragmatic argument, or maybe it's like a moral argument behind a certain kind of pragmatism. But the definition of this Darwinism is who is like, it's a kind of it's based on a value of strength, or based on a value of domination, or selective selection, or selective, what's the natural selection. But actually there's one good thing. There is a basis of understanding with people like Cohen, because they want to be pragmatic. So I think that trying to show them that it's not, it never worked in the history of Russia that easing pressure could create a compromise. There are, however, opposite examples, like the pay in the Pigs Bay, yeah, when the pressure actually led to the compromise. So if you want to be pragmatic, Mr. Cohen, then let's think what's gonna be the outcome of this policy and this policy. And the last thing, when it comes to genocide, if we would follow your way of thinking, then you can say that genocide happens once a week, because at least once a week, some people would like to kill 13 French tourists somewhere, or a part of the nation, okay, or even a bigger. But don't worry, I mean, listen, ethnic cleansing, like in Yugoslavia, it's still something which is very, 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 very bad event in a history. So to think, and sometimes I think that like pressing, I mean, I would say that genocide begins when there is a plan to exterminate a nation, or to exterminate a part of nation, like Jews in Europe, because you cannot exterminate Jews in America, or like Jews in because it's not just technically possible. Okay, then we talk about genocide. But generally, I don't think that we should be fetishists of definitions or fetishists of words. Then I'm postmodernist. I'm okay with this, because I'm not a fetishist of word postmodernism, of course.
I'm negative.
In terms of your question, well, what the people are doing now, what is the people's reaction in Ukraine? Well, I think there are many Ukrainians from Ukraine here, and they will probably give you the better answer. But what I observe is that the people in Ukraine are getting more and more nervous and irritating towards the government because the government is not implementing reforms and the changes for which people stood at the Maidan. So what I see is the rising impatience. Well, of course, there's a question. There is an idea of the third Maidan or the second Maidan. Well, is it possible? Well, my opinion is that, well, I don't have a clear answer, but I think that the more the situation, the war in the Donbass is ongoing, the longer it is ongoing, the more the possibility, the potential of the second Maidan is limited. The question from Kovaryavchuk. I don't have clear answer as well what to do. I would say that, of course, we should disseminate knowledge about the real goals of Russian politics. Well, I understand that there are different motivations from among people like Cohen, like you said, why they claim what they claim. So disseminating knowledge, conferences, public debates, and so on. But from the larger perspective, I would say that the Ukraine's success, that would be the Ukraine's final success, that would be the best answer to such people.
Maybe just to add to what people are doing. I mean, I think one of the kind of truly impressive things about what's happened in Ukraine at the time of Maidan and since the Maidan is what ordinary people are doing and how civil society functions in extremely challenging circumstances. And what they're doing now is, for example, dealing with displaced people, and, for example, keeping the army supplied, which without the efforts of ordinary people, civil society, individual efforts, people, keeping that army supplied, clothed, fed, it wouldn't be there. So that's the one thing that people are doing.
So let me collect another cluster of questions.
I've got three brief points. I wondered, it's basically to William's paper, I wonder if you'd looked at some of the big series of translations that were published, in the Soviet period. The Soviet government, had, program through Mierzkniga and, other organizations to publish a lot of ethnic minorities, and they published, a lot of Kazakh literature and other literatures. And I know there was censorship, of course, I understand that context. But I wonder if, if there was any Polish stuff published at that time, and maybe it's something you could look into, and also vice versa, because Polish publishers like Czytelnik or PIW, they also had, long, big programs, well-funded for translating world literature. Of course, it had to, again, fit a certain paradigm, but I just wondered, whether the Polish-Ukrainian thing comes into that. And my second thing, have you looked, or are you looking at, images of Ukrainians in Polish literature? Because you mentioned Joanna Michlitz and her great work on images of Jews, historically in Polish literature. I wondered if you'd looked at that, because it seems to me that, at least since the 90s, this is quite a positive situation. I mean, there's not many novels written with this as an issue, but I was thinking of Staszuk and his Galician Tales, which seemed to me a very positive attempt to portray Ukrainian and particularly Lemko culture. And there has even been instances where political correctness has taken over from literary correctness. If we think of the film that was made by Jerzy Hoffman of Sienkiewicz's Ogniem i Mieczem, and we know from the novel, Sienkiewicz's very negative attitude toward Chmielnicki and to the Ukrainians, but there was a deliberate effort made to reverse this in the production of that film, which of course provoked some reaction from literary critics saying, well, this isn't really Sienkiewicz, And I afraid somebody has to say it. I know you, when you mentioned Miłosz, you were not necessarily agreeing with it, you were just using him as an example. But, I mean, it's ridiculous to say that there are no Poles can't write good novels. I mean, I know, but somebody just has to say that just because he's a good poet doesn't mean to say he's a good literary critic. And we should not regard him as an authority any more than we should regard Gedroitz as an authority, I think so. Thanks.
There were some other hands.
In response to the point about Stephen Cohen, I mean, I think one of the problems, as I said in something I said yesterday, is that this conference is talking, and there's a dialogue between Poles and Ukrainians about these problems, and it's been fascinating and interesting to see how much progress is being made on many fronts about the ghosts of the past. But just listening to the speech from our MEP leads me to think about the problems of selling this dialogue and the points to a European audience. And I'd just like to ask Sławomir about his experience of writing for The Guardian and the reactions it's got in terms of trying to explain to a not very interested West European set of countries about these faraway lands of which we know very little, but in which we have lots of opinions. And they're mostly pro-Russian, because that's the way that they've been taught to understand Eastern Europe. It's the legacy of an assumption, a great power assumption, that this is the terrain of Russia, and therefore we must take account of Russia's sensibilities.
Thanks. I have a short comment and a question, and comment is also on what Sławomir was saying about American left and their position. I think that the argument that you're using regarding Russia not having time or will to reflect on the Communist Party is a very important one. I don't think, however, that actually we can get too far with that argument, because the motivation of American left is basically in American politics. So their debate is not about Russia. Russia just happened to be the topic. The debate is about the America, a particular position and particular history of individuals, political forces, and so on and so forth. So this is not very optimistic. The question that I have is in Ukraine, again, now it's somewhere in the background, but at some point there was this major interesting public debate about how many Ukrainians are there, 2 or 22, and some of the participants are here. When I listened to presentations of Polish scholars, there was one Ukraine. Everyone was speaking about Ukraine in general. And my question is, to what degree there is differentiation that, okay, Bandera, it's one part of Ukraine, and there are different political issues and tensions and things like that. So to what degree Ukraine appears in Polish public debate as something that is really work in progress, as opposed to a mirror image of a nation like a Polish nation, but it's a Ukrainian one. So thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we'll respond to those. William, do you want to start by responding to literary questions?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Ursula, for the questions. In terms of publishing, yeah, I mean, I think you kind of answered your own question in a way. What was published was chosen very carefully and framed in a very specific way to kind of conform to the ideology of the time. But in terms of literature that would explore the kind of let's say more difficult aspects of the coexistence of these different cultures, the conflicts, the kind of ambiguities and entanglements and so on, the sort of things that I was trying to talk about, that these things were not explored. So I guess that would be my answer. And And also, yeah, I think I did mention that. Yeah, there are the topic of Ukraine, Polish-Ukrainian relations has been dealt with in Polish culture to an extent, but I think it's just interesting to compare, with if you look at how has Polish literature written about its kind of big pre-war minorities, then there's a certain maybe discrepancy, I think, in the amount of attention that's been paid to Poland's lost Ukrainians, as it were.
I think the questions was to you.
Lalka by Raymond was the one that Miłosz mentioned. The second one I can't remember, and I cannot easily find out which one is it because the rest are very bad. I'm sorry. I mean, at least in 19th century, like listen. I mean, of course, I like. Listen, of course I agree because I try to find now the best novel of 19th century Poland. Maybe someone can help me. Give me just one name of the Polish good writer.
Specific context he was reading. I want just to refer to specific context. Miłosz said the phrase. Miłosz was obsessed with Dostoevsky and says that nothing would be written in the Polish novel that could be external part with Dostoevsky.
Actually, what I wanted to answer was that, of course, not Sławko, not. He never decided to write a book on Dostoevsky. However, he wrote text that would fill in 2 books. He was in a strange situation of being a teacher of Russian literature, in the same time not being. Actually, he was. Adam Michnik used to say, "I'm a anti-communist Russophile." Miłosz wouldn't say that he's a Russophile. Miłosz had his biases and his strong. For example, he didn't like many things in the Russian culture, like this kind of the way again, help me, cierpienie, how suffering, according to Russian attitudes, Russian soul, sacrifices you. He didn't like it, and he didn't like many other things. And actually, these are the core of Dostoevsky's novel. So that actually I wanted to answer with Dostoevsky. If you would give me a name of Polish writer, and I would say still I prefer Dostoevsky. But as for actually, I don't write. I never wrote regularly to Guardian, so I cannot answer to your question. Actually, we did once with Sławko Chrycak and Frank Sisson the letter, which was signed by hundreds of. Okay, so this was something to lead. It was like a calling for Marshall Plan. And then I forced them to publish it. But I didn't need to. Of course, we collected names. I mean, without Obama, Francis, and Elizabeth II, we had everybody. So they couldn't refuse. Absolutely right. It's anti-Americanism that they have in their minds, Stephen Cohen, not other things. I mean, they are just, and actually it works also in other countries, in European countries. This is why they are opposing this kind of strong attitude towards Russia, which is, but again, it's stupid.
It's a bizarre position for the left.
Yeah, of course, well, absolutely. It's bizarre position for any side, I think, but as for how Ukraine works in Polish public debate, when there was a 60th anniversary of Volhynia, I wrote a text to Gazeta Wyborcza when media could publish like long essays. It was like 3 or 4 pages. Michnik published it probably because he liked it. And then I was pretty radical at that time. I was like 20, and I really wanted to, change everything in one day. And I wrote an essay showing 2 schools about writing about Volhynia, atrocity. And of course I did. I mean, one that is like Radio Maryja way of thinking. So this kind of Polish we have this kind. Now they are strongly marginalized, like really. But there are historians, there are intellectuals. This guy like Bogdan Huk. I mean, some of you who are rather the scholars of Polish anti-Semitism or Polish, stupidity will know these names than the scholars about Ukrainian studies. But there is a certain school, and there is another school which is like more liberal, enlightened, and so on. But actually, I called both of them, and I even criticized Jan Grozd that he is still a nationalist because he's thinking in the national containers way. We are now good friends, and of course, but I helped him somehow trying to create the left-wing wall, the left-wing extreme, so he would be more in the civilized center instead of being himself the left-wing extreme. But I think if it wouldn't be about Ukraine, and thanks to Russia, usually our collective remembrance works as a competition between traditional conservatism and modernized conservatism. So this is like two schools that are competing. But of course, after Jedwabne, after what is happening now in Ukraine, after some other debates, but if you would follow the debate about expulsion of Germans, you would see that we are not really advanced as for Polish reflection. And I think that's what Pavel said. I strongly disagree. If you say Polonization, and you use this word, what you are saying is colonization, and it's not only about one letter. It's just the metrics of Polonization, Germanization. It's a colonization. So post-colonial studies is the first, actually, even if it's not fashionable or not, it doesn't matter. But of course, it's one of the tools that could be useful to do it. You can disagree with some of the post-colonial philosophers, but it doesn't mean that the general core of this tool is I cannot imagine studies about Polonization of Ukraine without this kind of way of thinking. I don't know if I answered all of these questions, but I think
about how Ukraine appears in Polish discourse.
that's what I said. I mean, of course, Ukraine is beloved by Poles and everything because we are afraid of Russia. I mean, that's absolutely for sure. Probably privately, the image of Ukrainians is, I mean, different in different parts of Poland and different in different social classes, I think. What is good is that it's changing. First time we have like visible minority of Ukrainians who are actually not minority because they are dispersed, but they are visible. If you like live in Warsaw and you go to the shops or something, you see Ukrainians, and because we have no other minorities, and it's not that Ukrainians came and take our taxes, for example, and or take one like part of the labor force division, okay? They do the same thing as Poles, which makes them more or less equal. Maybe I'm exaggerating because I have this romantic, not really pragmatic way of thinking about Poland, but I think that the image is that there is a strong sentiment, pro-Ukrainian sentiment. As you hear me having these radical, challenges even to the word genocide.
I think the organisers have suggested that we should stop now, as I know you're going to be continuing these conversations in your roundtable after tea. So I'd like you to join me in thanking our three panellists and our absent panellists very much.